In this video, I'm going to show you how to get clay from the pug mill and from a box properly onto the potter's wheel. This is actually an important part of centering that many people ignore. If I slice clay that came out of the pug mill in the cylinder form and put it on the wheel, I'm asking for trouble because the pug mill puts a spiral in this clay, and if you put it on the wheel in that orientation, it makes sense because it's round, but that spiral could cause it to S-crack later. Proper thing to do is just pound the clay into a ball, and then when you put it on the potter's wheel, it's likely not in the same orientation it came out of the pug mill. If you use clay from the box, it's important to throw away the twist tie right away. If you let this fall onto your workstation, it's likely that clay will go over it and it'll end up in the reclaimed clay. That's trouble, so throw the twist tie in the garbage. If you need to cover clay up, just do that. It does the same thing. Sorry about the crinkling. When you slice clay from the box, it's important that you don't do this. Many students slice some clay and then fold it up to make a ball. This is trouble because you just added air bubbles to the clay, and when you're throwing, it's going to delaminate along those fold lines, and the clay will just come apart underneath your hands. So the proper way to get clay out of the box is to cube it up. So I'm going to make modest sized pieces. This is about the size clay that I need. I'm just going to pound the corners over, and this is ready to go. This is about the right size ball of clay to use as well. You want to start off with something that more or less fits in your hand. That usually means the size of a big apple or a small orange. If you use a smaller piece of clay, it's hard to center, and if you use a bigger piece of clay, it requires more skill to throw. So this is a good size to begin with for me. Your size may vary based on the size of your hands. The gas pedal is off, so I can turn on the potter's wheel. It's important that the first thing you do is place the ball of clay in the center. You don't need to throw it at the potter's wheel. That's probably where the term throwing comes from. And it's also important that there's no water on here, so the clay will stick. If there's water underneath where the clay goes down, it won't stay. So by placing the ball of clay in the center, that helps to center the clay as well. The next thing to do is turn the wheel on slow, and since my hands are dry, I can clamp the wheel into position. Just hit it with both hands. This is important as well because since my hands are dry, water can't get underneath this ball of clay. If you just set a ball of clay on and then put water on, water will run underneath and then the ball of clay will slide all over when you're throwing. So if you place the ball of clay more or less in the middle and clap it, it's more or less centered, just like that. Centering involves several steps, and each one makes the clay closer to being in the middle. This wheel has a squeak. When you hit the ball of clay like this, it more or less will seal the clay down to the potter's wheel. That helps to keep the water from getting underneath the ball. Centering the clay is highly overrated. It's not a big deal really, although many people spend a lot of time working on it. Probably the most important part of centering the clay is let the wheel do the work. The wheel is turning, and my hands are going to stay still. That's what centers the clay. Lots of people think they have to push really hard to center the clay. You're not supposed to do the work. The momentum in the wheel or the electric motor in the wheel will actually do the work. When I put my hand out to center the clay, I'm actually going to push right here, which is right in line with the bones of my arm. That's important so that I don't strain my wrists. Many students who learn how to throw in high school try and center the clay doing something like this. This is about the worst thing you can do to your wrists that I can think of. It's important that you don't hurt yourself. So by placing my hand here at about 7 o'clock on the wheel is where the clay will hit the heel of my hand. Diagonally across from there is where I want to pull the clay. So one hand is actually going to pull and one hand is going to push. I kind of mean not push and pull hard. That's just where my hands will be. So rather than have your hands symmetrically arranged on the potter's wheel, they're kind of diagonally across from each other. This is the most efficient way to center the clay. All right, it's stuck down. I need to use water for lubrication. Water is the lubricant. If you feel the clay get sticky, you need to stop right away and add some more water. Let's talk about wheel speed. Most of these potter's wheels go really fast. This is intended for making very small diameter objects. In the treadle wheel, doesn't go very fast. The treadle wheel kind of is maybe this speed. This is the speed I'm comfortable throwing, but I hardly ever let the wheel go fast. Again, some people think that making the wheel go fast makes it easier to center. I don't really agree with that. I think that the most important thing is where your hands are rather than how fast the wheel is going. Having the wheel go faster doesn't necessarily make it easier to center the clay. So I'm going to get the clay wet and my hands wet, and then I'll put my hands onto the clay and give a little squeeze with the base of my hands. What I just did was made a hollow spot under here. That gives me a place to lift the clay. In order to center the clay, you need to move it. If you just put your hands on and squeeze, you're not actually moving the clay, and it very literally doesn't center it. What I'm going to do is lift the clay up and then push it back down again. That's how the clay actually gets centered the most efficiently. Move the clay to center it. The place where the clay is the most uneven right now is right at the wheel head. So this is a good time to use a tool and scrape away the clay that's not even. There are several options, but I can use the stick tool to cut the clay. I'll show you how to do this again later. Or you can use a rib. By making it a circle where it hits the wheel head, it helps to make the rest of the clay behave. So make a smooth circle here and you can center the clay more readily. So if I put my hands on that smooth spot, make a little bit of a hollow and then lift the clay and then push it back down again, it's centered. This is centered as good as it needs to be to make a pot. Another tool that you can use to make the clay a circle at the wheel head is your rib. This is easier to hold on to, so generally speaking, I use the rib to cut this clay away. It's also okay to make the uneven clay go to the wheel head and then cut it off, because you didn't weigh the piece of clay to make a certain size object anyway. When you use this tool, you should hold on to it with two hands to stay steady. And the closer you hold on to it to where it's cutting the clay, the better. So don't try and hold on back here because leverage is working against you. Many students put the whole surface of the rib down on the wheel head and it just makes an awful noise. So what I do is I pick it up so just the corner is touching, and I tilt the tool a little bit toward me and then just plow the clay off. That makes it a circle at the wheel head quite readily. I'd like to show you what part of my hands are touching the clay. So I'm dried off my hands. Generally speaking, it looks like this or like this. Only this section of my hand is really applying any force, and I'm kind of pulling the clay with my pinky. When I watch students work, I oftentimes say, take your hands away and let's look at the clay on your hands, and you can see that I'm trying to apply force with a great deal of surface area. Spreading the force out over this much surface area is just less efficient, and you have to push harder. The force is spread out over a larger area. So if you apply the force to a smaller amount of surface area, which you can see here, the force is much more, has a much more positive effect towards moving the clay. The next thing I'd like to show you is when I put my hands on the clay, you can't tell where I'm pushing. So I'll move the clay with my hands open. I don't generally throw this way, but if I do it like this, you can see how it works easier. I lift up the clay and then push it down. So I'm not using the whole palm of my hand ever. I'm using just this part.